The topic today is a startup ecosystem that lasts. We thought the best way we approach the topic, how startup that lasts, is actually focusing on this ecosystem. Because startup, there's only so much one startup can do. The greater question would be, how can we have a whole bunch of startup and SME and the government mutually support each other such that we can last the journey together. And if times allow, because we are from different part of ASEAN and Korea, we will talk a little bit about how we can support each other through their journeys. Our focus will be a little bit more on the public-private partnership that we have today. So I want to, in a bit, I'll give a chance for each of the panelists to talk a little bit about their take onto today's topic and a little bit background of themselves. But let me quickly introduce them a little bit. So we have Mr. Chris Young Lee from Korea. And then we have Mr. Brian Cole from Singapore. And we have Mr. Wientor Mada from Indonesia with us today. So very, very happy to be here. And to be fair, I think each of them can be a facilitator for today. So I really look forward to have a discussion with them about what really makes a startup and SME ecosystem that lasts, so that I'll encourage all our listener, which are startup and other ecosystem runner in different countries, really to chip in and all first think about how can we make it last in ASEAN together with our friend in Korea. I think that's the spirit of today. Quick introduction of myself. I was the former CEO of their Darussalam Enterprise, which is the SME government organization in Brunei that encourage startup, SME among others priority. I started my startup journey in the Silicon Valley, and since then has the privilege to go through 2 IPO here in Asia as board of director, one in actually Singapore and the other one in Hong Kong. Nonetheless, I think the most important thing is I realized that starting one company and bringing to IPO along with friends is one journey. However, I think the tougher journey is that how can we work together with all the different startups and different government so that at the end of the day, we can really bring up the standard of living and the productivity in each of our country and together as a group. I think that's a much bigger task ahead. So I really look forward to learn from Mr. Lee from Korea, because the high-tech sector in Korea is really leading the chart. Brian from Singapore, who has been graciously not only have the starting the startup ecosystem in Singapore, but also Brunei in the very early days. And I'll introduce more on that historical notes. And Pak Wientor from Indonesia, which is having the unenviable huge task of really helping the SME in Indonesia do sales and marketing across such a huge country. I think so today, I look forward to learning from each of our panelists, and then we have a good discussion with each other on the topic that we have. But first off the bat, I'd like to pass the floor to Mr. Chris Young Lee of Korea, who is the expert members of the Korean Institute of Startup and Entrepreneurship, which is KISED, in the Republic of Korea. And he has spent a lot of time in the private-public corporations in Korea and beyond. So as we know, Korea has been successfully developing a whole bunch of high-tech startup currently as we speak right now. Hugely competitive market in the country and in the labor's country. So I look forward to hearing from Chris his perspective of what's the secrets to making a private-public partnership that lasts. And then so that we can collaborate with you and your startup in Korea, Chris. So maybe we hand it over to Chris first, followed by Brian, and then followed by Wientor in that order, right? So without further ado, Chris, floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lu. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris, working for Korea Institute of Startups and Entrepreneurship Development. I have been working for KISED for the past 14 years, and I would like to briefly introduce to you the Korean startup ecosystem, and I would like to share some slides. I'll be as brief as possible. I think most of you have seen this diagram, which is commonly used by startupcommon.org. And in startup ecosystem, as you can see, there are many participants from R&D, investment, startups, entrepreneurship, government support system. Okay, next page. And for the next page, page 2, please. For the past about 15 years, 25 years, Korean government has focused on some sectors like from 1997 to 2007, the government policy stressed upon legal foundation and space support, which is hardware. And then from 2008 to 2012, government focused on friendly environment, easy business doing. And KISED started giving government grants to startups in 2009. And after that, from 2013 to 15, the government focused on ecosystem and virtuous cycle, which was quite difficult in Korea because we had no virtuous cycle. But then we found that to have virtuous cycle, we need private first policy. But then what should the government do? So we had a private-public partnership model. So representative program is TIPS, Tech Incubator program for startups. And since 2016, the government focuses on high growth forms support. So the government now is focusing on growing high growth startups and also unicorns. Next page, please. And as you, I think these ones are very good papers by the Professor Eisenberg and then Mason and Brown. Yeah, there are some 3 issues. Do not rely on policies supporting general companies. Focus on high growth startups. And second, intervene holistically. Piecemeal approaches may lead to a very bad outcome. And third, sustainable pricing mechanism should be kicked in. This means that we need to support startups to have marketing ability or market researches. So this is the which the government policy need to focus on to have startups that last long. So for other matters, I will speak at the discussion. Okay, thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Lee. No, thank you for a very quick intro and holistic introduction of what Korean have went through to really build out the ecosystem. Thank you in the 4 stages that you mentioned. As for our audience, I think what we are saying is that yes, we can talk about startup that last, but as importantly, a startup is just a drop in the ocean. So let's talk about how to make the ocean last. So and therefore we're focusing on the ecosystem today here. And thank you, Mr. Lee, for sharing a bit of your insight into the Korean ecosystem models. And I already have a question for you, which is like, what's the ambitions of Korean ecosystem in ASEAN, right? But we will leave that for now, Mr. Lee, and I'm sure you have more things to say. If I can pass on our spotlight to Mr. Brian Cole, very good friends for a long time, who at the NUS Enterprise has been really spearheading the startup ecosystem in Singapore as director of NUS Enterprise in Singapore. But what people really do not know, and I want to say it because for those of us in Brunei, we know that Brian and his team has really been there laying the foundation for the startup ecosystem in Brunei as well. So thank you, Brian. Really, thank you for putting many years in Brunei, and we'd love to hear from you, your perspective of what are some of the things that you've seen in Singapore in the region, so that we can continue to learn from you as well. So without further ado, Brian, maybe I'll pass the spotlight to you so you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and more importantly, some of your perspective on startup ecosystem.
Okay, Sunu, thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction. And I must say that it's been a wonderful time actually in working with all the Brunei ministries and different parties. So, but you know, and without getting into the details of that, a little bit for those who do not know me, but I'm also honored this afternoon to be with Chris as well as Pak Wiranto. I come from the National University of Singapore, which is one of the 6 public universities in Singapore. And as a university, that's one of the, if you talk about lasting ecosystem, universities are a great platform to support the startup ecosystem because it's neutral. And the agenda of the university is really quite different. And I'll get into that a little later. So NUS is unique in that sense. We have a cluster called the NUS Enterprise, which represents the innovation and entrepreneurship arm of the university, or sometimes you just call it I&E. Innovation and entrepreneurship is an important strategic trust for the university, and therefore we're glad to say that we've been given great support from the senior management of the university, meaning the president and the provost and the board itself. So that commitment and support has been very useful in ensuring that we are able to continue to grow. And because such an ecosystem is not easy to maintain, and it requires quite a bit of continuous support before we see any results. Now, what does NUS Enterprise do as a university? And basically, there are 3 things that we look into. As a university, we look into the academic side of it in terms of supporting innovation and entrepreneurship. We have many programs. I just want to name 2, our NUS overseas colleges, which we have seen close to almost 3,000 alumni coming out and more than close to 700 startup companies that have been produced out of this program. Last year in COVID itself, we launched our Master of Venture Creation. So that has seen also a great take-up. So academia is something that we continue to do, and there are other programs that we look at in supporting innovation and entrepreneurship. The second area that NUS Enterprise looks into is venture creation and IP management. So IP management is pretty straightforward in terms of like a tech transfer office, but the unique element is the venture creation part, because as a university, we create many intellectual property, which or from the research itself, we see a lot of intellectual property. Now, how do we translate this? Because what's more important is how do we commercialize some of these IP and translate them into commercial entities. And we have the venture creation element. So we have an accelerator program called GRID, Graduate Research Innovation Program. And we have actually had 6 runs that will happen, completing the 6th run this month itself. We have actually created close to 100 startups in the deep tech space. So this is something quite unique in that sense of what the university is doing. We are launching our technology access program next year, and that will see a wider take of venture creation as well. Now, after creating the startups, there's also the other element, because how do we support the startups? So we have a platform that supports our startup, which we call the Block 71. We have other platforms as well in terms of the maritime Pier 71 and also for cyber I-71. Now, what all these platforms do is to provide beyond just creation, but how do we scale up the startups and push them outside? Singapore, as you know, is a very small country. We have a very small market. And therefore, as you know, it's great to be connected into such a environment with Korea as well as with Indonesia and the others. So we do want to see that connectivity, and then how do we work with many of our partners within the region itself. So this is something that we do in what NUS Enterprise does. So far, we've seen more than 1,000 startup companies. And often people ask, well, we're glad to say this year we can announce 2 unicorns that came out of our environment, Carousel as well as PetSnap. And at any one time, we actually incubating more than 100 startup companies. Our Block 71 spans outside of Singapore. So we have 3 in Indonesia, in Jakarta, Jogja, and Bandung. And then we've also launched in Vietnam. We also have setups in China and the US, but we are looking into expanding within the ASEAN region itself. So I think with that, I just want to give you a brief introduction of where I come from and what do we do. Sunin, let me hand the session back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian, for that introduction. I think I'm learning. Brunei is very similar to Singapore. Or Singapore ahead of the curve in terms of the technology and some of the financing that's going on and more. But similar boat, right? Small country. The local market is not enough. We want to go out to join the rest of our friends in ASEAN.
That's right.
Whereas in Korea, you can play both, right? In the market, and so is extension, right? And last but not least, I'd like to hand on the floor to Pak Wientor in Indonesia, which have a very different problem than many of us, right? Huge market in Indonesia, but need a lot of work to develop each of the startup, and not just startup, the SME, right? I think that's what Pak Wientor is facing right now, right? So Pak Wientor is the director of marketing business of Smesco, which is the SME organization, the government organization for Indonesia. And have a brief talk with him yesterday. We have a good talk, and I'm like, wow, what I did not know before yesterday is that there are 130 million SME. In Indonesia. Wow. So that itself is no small task. Let's not even talk about ecosystem that lasts, right? Let's talk about how to even start building the ecosystem, starting from logistic of making sure SME can send, deliver, and fulfill, make all the fulfillment across Indonesia, right? So without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor over to Pak Wientor to introduce himself and talk a little bit about the work that he and his team are doing in Indonesia.
Okay,
all yours.
Thank you, Shun. And ladies and gentlemen, greeting from Indonesia. I'm Wientor, and I'm the Director of Business and Marketing of Smesco Indonesia. Smesco is actually a government agency under the Ministry of Cooperative and SME. And we only have one main job, actually. It's only one, but it's very hard. Is that to market Indonesian SME product domestically and also in international market. We are expecting to be the epicentrum of digital onboarding for Indonesian SME right now. And Indonesia, as you know, is a very large country. And like I said before to Sun, that from east to west, it takes about 7 to 8 hours of flight, not to mention the islands. We have more than 17,000 islands. And in terms of SME numbers, Indonesia is more than 130 million micro, small, and medium enterprises. Out of that 130 million, 98% of them are micro businesses. We are talking about street vendors or somebody who pop up doing business from home because of the pandemic, and so many more. One of the things that they're in common is that they are not, bankable, which is one of the huge challenges we are facing here in Indonesia. Why am I have to talk about this? Is simply because we cannot talk about SME, building SME ecosystem or startup ecosystem without solving the basic problems like logistic or shipping costs. And one of the things that I have to reveal also is that Indonesia is a low digital literacy, and the Ministry of Cooperative and SME right now is pushing very hard to get all these problems tackled, such as, well, we are building right now our own fulfillment center. Fulfillment center is packing warehousing to help lowering the shipping costs. And we also aim 30 million SMEs to be digitalized in 2024. Now we have around only 17 million, and we are still have a long way to go to 2024. Very optimistic though. So in Indonesia, we're maybe a little bit different. Building ecosystem that lasts doesn't mean that we're putting all as many as startup as possible in the incubator, but also we have more helicopter view. We are building the infrastructures, collecting more, aggregators or off-takers, the Mada shape of the the SMEs, connecting between ministries and other government agencies, and last but not least, of course, how to make this public-private partnership running smoothly becoming our goal as well. Thank you.
No, thank you, Pak Wientor. As you are describing your challenge in Indonesia, what I'm thinking at my mind, I'd love to hear from the rest of the panel what they think, right? As well, is that the real challenge of ecosystem is that we are all different. And actually, the opportunity is that we can help out each other. I think that's the key thing, right? Indonesia need huge market, need a lot of support, but the opportunity for the rest of us, right? From Singapore, from Brunei, from Korea, right? Opportunity there, but it's really to understand the market better with yourself, such that we can support each other a lot better, right? So I saw the opportunity being, ecosystem that last ecosystem. I'm getting ahead of myself, which is towards the conclusion, which is how we can support each other. I think that is a key to the solution of building ecosystem that lasts, right?
Yeah.
But before that, maybe let me bring to a quick discussion about what do we think are some of the secret of building good public-private partnership such that the ecosystem can work, right? How can we work better with SME, and how can SME work better with the government sector? So maybe I'll pass the ball back to Mr. Lee a little bit. I believe you have a little bit more of information you want to share with us. But again, my question for you is how can Korea work better with ASEAN, or how can ASEAN work better with Korea, right? And with that, after that, I open up the floor to all of us, right? Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So if you ask one factor that startup can last long, I think it is there any market? Is there any target market? I think that is the first factor. And I'll show you the slides again. So based on Korean private public partnership, so we page 4, please. Yeah, so we developed a program called TIPS, which is that because startups, after 5 years, usually 70 to 80% companies just go bankrupt, and only 20% is left. So it takes time for especially technology-based startups to survive. So the government planned this program that if on accelerators, it can be angels or venture capitals invest more than in US dollars, it is about 100K, 100,000 US dollars to a startup, and the government selects the startups and matches up to 900K US dollars. So this could be a total 1 million US dollars, and which is 1 billion Korean won. So as end of last year, more than 1,200 startups were selected, and we are still on the way to see the performances and outcome, but by far about 390 million R&D expenditures were spent, and further more than 3 billion investment were made. So these startups are one of the representative startups in Korea. So we had more than 30 successful exits. So I think we are still on the way, because the program started in 2013. So it is less than 10 years. In 2 years or 3 years, I think we can have a very bright performances. For globalization, I'll tell you one example. A company who was interested in Indian market and went to India and found that almost everybody has no bank account. Only 17% has their own bank account, and they have a settlement when they ride taxi, when they go to a restaurant, they use mobile phone to have a settlement payment. So focus on that. A company named Balance Hero launched into an Indian market in less than 2 years. They had 70 million application downloads, so which was quite a bomb. And in less than 20 years, they had more than 70 employees. So this is one of the example. Next page, please. And also we try to have cooperations with bigger United States companies like Google, Nvidia, Microsoft, Amazon, because they need some innovative product and services and new ideas. So we have cooperation. We just have some events and some education and mentoring sessions. So we just link them to startups, and they have consultation, and if the product is prominent, and they can invest, or they can have a further cooperation contract made. So this is for the takeoff program for startups. The next page. So by far, KISED has supported about 40,000 startups. And as you can see in the graph, KISED supported startups have lived longer. For example, in 5 years, or more than half of the startups survived, compared to general startups, more than about 80% fade away. So I think this works, but still we need to look into some high growth startups. And among 40,000 startups, we had over 600 growth startups, and our mission is to raise this ratio so that high growth startups can have a takeoff phase and then develop into prominent SMEs. Okay, thank you.
So I just look at the time, ladies and gentlemen. I realize that time fly. We have 15 minutes left into our panels. I felt like we need a part 2 of these panels. I want to
Sunlu, if I can just jump in on something to kind of keep the relevance of the topic. I just wanted to say something that I'm hoping, just understanding the audience. I believe there are startups in the audience, as well as ecosystem players from the government, as well as investors and incubators and accelerators. I just want to draw some kind of relevance for both of these groups, and why an ecosystem, a good startup, or vibrant and successful startup ecosystem is important for a startup itself. Let me take an African proverb that says it takes a village to build up, to train and build up a child. Actually, I say the same thing. It takes a whole country, a whole ecosystem to make a successful startup, a startup that lasts as well. In fact, all the startups that we've seen that have been successful and are scalable have actually seen support functions from government support in some form of ecosystem, or even a VC itself, and therefore it really constitutes many components itself. So from the ecosystem builders, I just want to say that this is an important role. If we want to see more successful startups and scalable startups, we need to continue to do what we're building, and we need to just keep at our job in ensuring that we create an environment, a vibrant environment, effective environment, efficacious environment in this space itself. And for startup founders, co-founders, I would also want to say that it is important for you to be connected to the right ecosystem. because different ecosystems have different support functions. You do need to connect to the right one so that you can grow and scale and gather the whole support itself. So, just to encompass, what we've been talking about, Sunlu. Yeah.
No, thank you so much, Brian, for keeping the focus on it such that we can focus on the ecosystem at last. We have a question from the floor regarding how do we encourage the private sector to invest in startup? Maybe we can hear a little bit. Brian, maybe you have more insight from there. Maybe Chris has some insight from Korea too.
Okay, I was just writing the answer, but actually the government does not. The government only increases fund of funds, which is matching fund to private investment. So when they invest private money and they apply for fund of funds to the government agency, KBIC, and then they evaluate and matches the government fund. That is the fund of fund run by the government agency. And other investments are just made by private size. If accelerators or angels find it prominent, then they just invest in startups.
Let me give a perspective of this very quickly. What we have found is when we talk about corporates being involved, and actually I want to include government agencies as well. We find that in the space of corporates itself, corporate innovation is a very big thing. Every corporate is now talking about it, but many of them do not know how to actually implement a corporate innovation program. Mainly because they have to be clear about why do they want this corporate innovation. It's not just having a venture fund to invest, but the clarity that they know that they need to think of a new innovation coming into their whole business endeavor. And we understand corporates have to think of the commercial aspect of it. So it's very important that, an organization, an ecosystem builder organization like us, must understand where the corporates are coming from and identify what is it that is a pain point, and therefore then is that creating a new business line? Then how do we find this? We've also worked with government agencies that know that an industry needs to be transformed into something that's a lot more innovative to keep up with the times. That's where we also work. For example, in our Pier 71, we work with the Maritime Port of Authority because they know this is an important industry for us in Singapore, and therefore we are able to then create programs that invigorate, introduce startups, and increase the innovation within this industry itself. Yeah. So Sunlu, that's a perspective of how I see this.
No, thank you so much. I am looking at Park Wientor. Wish to get your perspective of as you build the ecosystem in Indonesia. What are the government and private sector perspective that you are putting in place such that the ecosystem can be beneficial to the startup and SME over there?
Yeah. Well, I think every business is unique. Every country is also a unique one. We are facing different challenges on each country right now. Indonesia, in my data, we have more than 2,000 startups, and we are the biggest netizen number 4 of biggest market in the world. We have 240 million people in Indonesia. Everybody sees us as the market. We do not want just to be the market. We want to lead the way also. So right now we have 6 unicorn and 1 decacorn already established. Right now, the startup ecosystem is being led by the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprises. So every single state-owned company right now, they're heavy investing in every single startup that they see it is potentials. But the bottom line are, the element of success, how to build the ecosystem that lasts. I think there must be a massive support, from the government, including the political will. And well, the government will, in regard with infrastructures, also the financial institutions, including the academia and also the media. It is very important to put the media in front also. Secondly, I think the collaboration between institutions are also very important. On a larger scale, collaboration between countries, like what we have right now, is also very important. It's not just we learn each other, but how we can, open doors from its, other products. And thirdly, as an ecosystem in Indonesia right now, we are really pushing ourselves very hard to use the cooperative throughout the country to be a leading sector as well in this ecosystem. And we also believe that ecosystem are, it gotta be a by design ecosystem. Somebody or an institution has to be the leading sector, so this leader has to make sure that the ecosystem, can work for last as well. I think that's my point of view.
No, thank you so much, Pak Wientor. Chris and Brian, any comment to what Pak Wientor is speaking?
Yeah, okay. I totally agree with Mr. Wientor on that. Leading in Korea, the leading ventures were like Naver and Kakao and some game companies, and also corporate venturing is quite important, and most of all, entrepreneurship is the most important thing for startups that last long, I think. And in Korea, entrepreneurship sometimes has some features like fighting spirit, because about 70 years ago, Korea had nothing, totally ruined after the Korean War, but we had to fight to build up something. So so for startups, I want to say have fighting spirit with sound entrepreneurship.
Thank you. Brian?
Well, I just have one small thing to add for startups that last, really and it's taking on from Mr. Lee itself. To build a lasting startup, it takes a lot of grit, and be prepared for a long, hard journey. And it has to go beyond. Passion is very important, but more than passion itself is, the ability to want to stay, the ability to evolve, to also understand the markets, because markets change, and therefore you need to pivot. We hear this word pivot often in startups, but we are and must be able to say that, hey, if markets have moved on, then how do you continue to pivot into something, and until you find a market, a viable, addressable market that's big enough, and then dive quickly into it as well. So and of course, this is where the ecosystem comes in to kind of provide that support as well.
Great, thank you so much. Time is short. I want to dive into one last bit, and then we wrap up for today very quickly. So maybe it's about how can we collaborate better with each other. I think with that, right? We end on that note, right? Because I think today is a very broad topic, that we have. I think we have, what we have done is we sum up the different big pieces across, such that I think all of us understand each other where we are on the landscape, such that we can take this on further, maybe on a one-on-one or on a small group basis, such that we can work closer together. I think that's the intention for today, right? It's not meant to be solve the problem. I wish we could solve it in 45 minutes, right? But on that note of collaborating with each other, maybe I'll take a little bit on the Pak Wientor, a little bit about Indonesia, because this is a huge market, right? So maybe I start with him first, asking, now you saw Korean, Singapore, Brunei, and I'm sure a lot of our other ASEAN friends, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam on the chat, and more on the chat, right? Yeah. How would you like to welcome the different ecosystem, not just individual startup, right? The different ecosystem to support you in Indonesia.
I witnessed myself with my eyes that in the same building with me, we have this Green Business Center, a Korean startup incubator, which is this month is going to bring 15 Korea's company from digital, beauty, electronics, medical, to the fashions, come to Indonesia and we'll have the meeting with Indonesia SME and startup. The Green Business Center is a collaborations from the Indonesia Ministry of Cooperative and SME and the South Korea Ministry of SME and Startup through Korean Innobis Association. So I really wish that we would bring more of this kind of initiative throughout ASEAN countries, so we can, doing this hand in hand. And actually, ASEAN is one big strong market, but not only the market, but we also have to be the very important player in the world instead of startup and SME.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pak Wientor. Yeah. The rest of the panel, as we are wrapping up as we speak, right?
Let me give you a very quick, brief handles. For those involved in the building a lasting startup ecosystem. I was trying hard to think, what is it if I were to say it's important, and I think of 3 C's, so very easy handles for those involved. First of all, I think as you're building up a startup ecosystem, there needs to be clarity of mission. Your objectives and outcomes must be very clear. And this is important because then the importance of the sponsorship, which comes to the second point, which is commitment to the whole ecosystem. In our earlier discussion, I talked about, making sure that it's a long-term approach. You're not going to see something happen very quickly. So patience is very important in building up an ecosystem, and investing in the startup, in the environment. This is also the other piece. So you have clarity of mission, commitment to the ecosystem. And then with that, we can pull all the collaboration, which is the last C of the networks between the countries together, because until there's clarity within your own ecosystem, you can then create a greater sum coming out by connecting with one another. So the collaborative model then becomes important in that sense. So the 3 C's there again, clarity, commitment, as well as collaboration.
Well, thank you, Brian. Fully agree. And actually, we are already on the last part, right? How can we collaborate together with Indonesia? And Pak Wientor mentioned that, right?
Yeah.
Chris, anything you want to say as we wrap up?
In the morning session, I already suggested that we form a working group between ASEAN and ROK collaborative units, agencies, or whatever. And so I think 3 basic factors are, startups need 3 basic factors. First one is information, and second one is partners in trust. So government agencies can play a role in helping them have trust when dealing with contractors or buyers. And third one is that experiences in foreign countries, different culture, and so on. So I already suggest that 3 agendas, and so let's keep in touch, and maybe even not officially, we can contact each other for helping each other and
certainly.
Thank you so much. And I think each of us represent different ecosystem in each of our country. I think with our friends that know us, contact us, or the organizer, we can put each other in trust and make something happen on the bigger side, right? Building on what Chris mentioned, let's get the information. I think today we have lots of those. I think we learn from each other, and we are building some partner in trust across the ASEAN and Korea, such that we can hopefully, have more startup work in each other countries, so that we can really gain the experience like what Chris mentioned. Thank you, and thank you everybody for here. And I love what Brian mentioned, the 3 points, but I just pick up the last 2 points, which is commitment. I think this is why we are here for. And the last part, which is collaboration. I think this is what this forum is really about. Not just between startup, but really between the entire ecosystem. Thank you so much. And I look forward to privately, I think hopefully all of us can link out in a group, and there are more to go in making sure each of our country, as we work together, we can bring prosperity to our startup, SME, and our people. I think that's the end of the day. That's what we're gunning for. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and stay safe.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.